This is the Louisiana Federation for Children Town Hall, Louisiana Early Literacy, introducing the Steve Carter Literacy Program. Let's welcome Town Hall Moderator, American Federation for Children Board Member, and LFC President, Ann Duplessis.
Good afternoon, all, and thank you so very much for joining us this afternoon to explore, the Louisiana Early Literacy Initiative or bill. Early childhood literacy is seen by education experts and advocates as one of the most important factors in predicting the long-term educational outcomes of students. In 2012, the Louisiana Legislature passed the Early Childhood Education Act. And that was in recognition of the fact that Louisiana students must have a strong foundation to ensure their success at all levels of education. In the effort to close the state's achievement gap, Louisiana lawmakers will consider House Bill 85 during the upcoming legislative session, also known as the Steve Carter Literacy Program. HB 85 would provide Louisiana families with payments of up to $500 per student per year for eligible services intended to improve reading or literacy skills. The program would serve up to 168,000 students in the first year. Joining us today to discuss Louisiana's challenges of addressing early childhood literacy are Representative Jason Hughes. He's Louisiana House Representative representing District 100 in New Orleans. Ms. Thelma French, President and CEO of Total Community Action, Inc. Mr. Kenneth Francis, Director of Policy and Child Advocacy with Agenda for Children. And Michael Willis, Director of Public Policy at the Center for the Development and Learning. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for this very important discussion today. So, Representative Hughes, tell us about House Bill 85, the Steve Carter Literacy Program. How will this legislation help to close Louisiana's education gap?
Well, thank you, Senator. And first, let me thank AFC for hosting this very important town hall meeting on this Holy Thursday. I'm very excited to team up with my colleague from Baton Rouge, State Representative Scott McKnight. Together, we have introduced what is now House Bill 85, the Steve Carter Literacy Bill. And the intent of this bill is to help students in kindergarten, fifth grade, we're focused specifically on kindergarten through fifth grade, that are not currently at grade level. The goal is to help them get on grade level. As you said in your introduction, this bill would allot $500 stipends to children that are identified that are not on grade level. And these stipends would go directly to a qualified, as identified by the Louisiana Department of Education. And so, these will be entities that are qualified to help our children get on grade level. Now, I will say, I don't just look at this as an education issue. I look at this as a workforce issue. I look at this as a healthcare issue. I look at this as a mental issue, and I look at this as a criminal justice reform issue. Obviously, if our students can't read, chances are they will not be productive in our workforce. Chances are they will not be as healthy as other citizens. The data makes that very clear. And unfortunately, their chances of dropping out of school are much greater and are more likely to enter our penal system. So this is a very consequential bill, and I think this is one of the most important bills that we will see during this legislative session. And so I'm very excited to partner with my friend, Representative McKnight, in bringing this bill.
You're absolutely right, Representative Hughes. This is an important bill, and it doesn't just reach the educational aspect of a child's development and of the state. It's far more reaching, and that's why this is an important piece of legislation. Mr. Francis, with Agenda for Children, can our children have any chance of being successful if they're not reading at grade level? And what happens to the learning gaps as students continue in school if they're not reading at grade level, and if this isn't addressed at a very early age?
And the simple answer is the gaps just widen, that they get ever wider every year that the issues are not addressed. The simple answer to whether or not they can succeed or not is it would be extremely, extremely hard. What we commonly know is that you spend your time from kindergarten to third grade learning to read, and then from third grade on in school, you're reading to learn. So imagine the type of topics and the type of content in school that you'll be learning from third grade through the end of high school and into college. If you're struggling to read fluently and read with comprehension, you're really going to struggle to learn the material, which is why at that age and that switch, we start to see the gaps between children who have had access to quality early childhood education and early literacy programs start to really struggle compared to their peers. And those gaps start to widen in a way that make it increasingly difficult over the years to close. So the simple answer to your question is no. If we do not solve this problem, what you will see is a continued gap along the lines of race and socioeconomic background that we have seen for years and years. And you also see them fall behind their peers nationally as well.
Yeah. Mr. Willis, the Center for Development and Learning, your organization views literacy and education as civil rights. Yes, how does Louisiana achieve these civil rights for students, and what would you say is the path forward?
The big path forward for that is making sure that all of our teachers have the training and resources and materials to then turn around and help the students. And whether it be from rural Louisiana to the urban areas, it's got to be across the board support that way. Because if our teachers aren't trained in that science of reading, when they get in the classroom, they're not going to be able to help the students in the way they need. And that's so critically important to do that because, the numbers we know with that is students who aren't reading on grade level by third grade are 4 times as likely to drop out of high school, 6 times as likely if you're coming from a low income family. And those children who drop out are 63 more times more likely to be incarcerated. So if we're not providing our teachers with the resources and allowing them to have the professional development, be trained in that phonemic awareness, and then be able to provide it to our students, we're setting our students up for failure. And then
right, wow. And Ms. French, of course, with Total Community Action, you are an icon with regards to early education and have been providing tremendous educational outcomes for years. Your organization, as we said, provides childhood development services through Head Start. How important is it that the resources be directed to children at the earliest age possible?
Literacy development is a fundamental component of a child's overall development, and it begins well before he or she enters school. So beginning at infancy, experiences that help the children to talk, read, and write help them to progress toward literacy. So the research is consistently telling us that those first 1,300 days help shape the child's capacity to learn, to grow, and experience. So we've transitioned over the last 40 years from the understanding that literacy development begins at 3 to saying that it begins in early childhood. It actually begins prenatal. And we encourage our pregnant moms to read to their unborn, to begin the habit of reading to children. So there is no too young age to begin to develop their appreciation for literacy and those other skills related to literacy.
That's absolutely, absolutely true. So Representative Hughes, we did throw out some numbers of what we think that this program, the number of students we believe this program is going to impact. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the reach and really in the effect of this reach with the bill?
Sure, absolutely. So the way the bill is tailored, we're only focusing on students that are in kindergarten through 5th grade. Out of the over 700,000 students that are currently enrolled in public schools, 169,000 students will qualify for this program. So I think that puts into perspective the magnitude of the problem that we're facing. And when you think of that 169,000 number, that does not capture our students in pre-K, and that does not capture our students in 6 through 12. And what we know is that we have students that are in 6 through 12 and pre-K that are currently not on grade level. So we clearly have a crisis there. But we wanted to focus on that K through 5th component. But what it does highlight, to Ms. French's point and others, it highlights the need for an early foundation. So critical investments in early childhood to hopefully help alleviate this problem in the future. And talk to any practitioner. When our kids get to kindergarten, they have to be able to read on day one. Now, another thing that I want to put into perspective when we look at the fiscal note, because folks love to talk about fiscal notes, this bill will have a fiscal note in excess of $85 million. And that, again, highlights the magnitude of the problem that we're facing. But it's important that, we invest in these students, try to get them back on grade level. And I'm confident that we can if we really be deliberate about this. And I feel that the $85 million investment now is very meaningful, and it's much better than making an even more expensive investment if they unfortunately end up in the penal system, if they drop out, if they end up unemployed. So this is a critical investment, and that's what I look at it as, an investment in our kids, our most precious commodity.
And an early investment. Ms. French, where do you see childhood childcare fitting in with this whole problem of early childhood literacy?
I think that very supportive of what Representative Hughes just said. We have a critical role to develop the recognition, appreciation, and phonetics in early childhood education. At kindergarten, you are expected to read now. Many of us can say we learned how to read in the 1st grade. At kindergarten, proficiency is the ability to read. So our early childhood investment must be that our programs are supported, our early childhood programs are supported and structured to introduce those fundamental skills of literacy, word recognition, phonetics, but also to introduce the fun of reading and the joy and appreciation for the foundation to literacy. And I think that as a state, we have just begun to make true investments in early childhood and the quality of early childhood education. And this, as a part of a continuum, there has to be a more concentrated focus on the literacy component of early childhood.
We've talked about the importance of catching, reaching a child early as possible. And I'm going to just open this question up to anyone on the panel, and everyone can weigh in. But, when is it too late to turn a child around? I mean, what is that critical age that if you don't have that child reading and understanding at that age, it's too late? I would like to think that it's never too late. But,
yeah, I was going to say that.
But it becomes harder,
Mm-hmm.
as well as with all the other challenges that some of these kids face. As Representative Hughes, I'm sorry, I was about to call you Jason. But as Representative Hughes has mentioned, the other things that it impacts if they're not getting the reading in early. So I'd love to hear any one of you, your thoughts on that.
Well, I'll jump in first. I'm just saying, I know Kenny and others want to jump in on this, to you, Senator. We can't ever give up on our children. And so right. I think it's never too late. However, the older a child gets, it obviously becomes increasingly more difficult. And that's why with this bill, we want to try to capture students as early as possible. Now, what we know is that by the time a child reaches 3rd grade, that is a critical grade, a critical indicator on whether or not a student is more likely to continue to matriculate with proficiency or is projected to drop out of school. And currently, I want everyone to know this statistic. Currently in Louisiana, only 46% of our third graders, let me repeat that, only 46% of our third graders are currently on grade level with respect to reading. So that means 54% of our third graders are not on grade level with respect to reading. And what that signifies is that they are 2 to 3 times more likely to drop out of high school.
You're on mute.
How do I? Oh, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I would agree with everything that Representative Hughes just said. Of course, I echo the sentiments that, it's never too late for our children. I believe our children are limitless. The limits that our children have are the limits that we place on them by not giving them the access to the resources that they deserve. To add to the point that he was just making, when you look at that data about that 46% of children in Louisiana reading on grade level in third grade, the data actually looks worse when you select out some of our higher performing parishes that are actually dragging the entire state up. When you look at a lot of the river parishes, a lot of our more rural parishes, particularly in the Mississippi Delta part of the state, it looks a lot more dire than that. A lot of the state is carried by 4 or 5 parishes that are up near 70, 80% proficiency. But when you look at individual parishes, you see a lot of parishes with data that looks like 20, 30, 15% of kids reading on grade level. And so it's actually much worse when you look at the data for specific parishes and specific regions of our state. The second thing I would add to that is that the important point that Representative Hughes just made about the third grade switch from learning to read and reading to learn and the importance of that in a child's education attainment. I would also add to that, going back to Ms. French's point earlier about the first 1,300 days of a child's life, commonly known as the first 4 years. Within those first 4 years, 90% of brain development happens in a child's mind. And so if we miss that opportunity, it's an enormous opportunity we're missing to be able to prepare children to succeed in kindergarten and beyond. And we know that early literacy starts with healthy brain development. And so this is all compounds. And I think that this conversation consistently has to be about building a birth through adolescence continuum and not just looking at these education in specific grade bands. We spend so much time specifically in Louisiana on remediation in 4th and 8th grade. What would happen if we actually invested our kids in the ages, or the earliest ages, when those investments would go the furthest? And so that's what I would say in response to that.
And my response, being that TCA is a full service agency and we are a whole family agency, I would first concur that there should never be a time that it's too late to teach a person, or to help people develop their literacy skills. However, I also would agree that from the 3rd grade through the 12th grade, particularly 8th grade, is the most difficult time to teach literacy. These are the reading to learn years, fundamental years. And it is also when the social issues of the inability to read become a peer pressure issue. We know that in Louisiana, 24 to 26% of our adults are at level 1 proficiency. So I would say that we as a state need a continuum, because as a workforce entity and a reentry entity and trying to move all people to economic self-sufficiency, as a state, for us to raise our economic issue, we've got to address the literacy issue from both ends. We have the remedial part, but of course, with Kenny, I want to start earlier and more intense, and then actually bring this to where we have a higher proficiency in literacy in our state.
And I'll echo that. It's really is just cyclical, and it's a long lifespan project. It really is. The mistake we make so often is we all have our own little areas that we are experts in, or think we are at least. And whether it be that first 1,300 days or the K through 3 piece, it really is all so interconnected, because one, we have to get to those children early, and we have to make them excited to read and do that. And then once they get into the school system, it's the same thing, provide them with the resources to continue that education. But one of the things, to your point, Ms. French, that's often overlooked is how many parents and adults were never taught and don't have the ability to teach their children. So it's not like these kids don't want to learn how to read. If they don't have access to that high quality childcare, which just in the Delta isn't always available, they don't stand a chance before they even get started. So it really is something you have to look up from the 30,000 foot view of this is a whole life issue. If we want to truly make a difference and impact that birth, K through 3, 8th, 12th, and lifelong thing, we can't just break them down into those small little micro sections. We really do have to look at it as a whole picture and come up with a plan to keep a child developing until they go to high school, and whether they go to college, trade school, and whatever they decide to do with their life. It really is to be ingrained inside of them that reading is exciting and how many doors that can open for you. And then not only that, they can turn around and once they decide to have a family and plant their roots right here in Louisiana, they can provide the same opportunities to their children.
You know, the pandemic has had a tremendous impact on the country, the world, right? And the idea of our kids and our educators having to pivot in such a short period of time from in-class, in-person learning to learning via the website or FaceTime or Teams or whatever it was we were doing. And we've all had to learn how to pivot and hold our meetings and webinars and educational sessions through this means. I know we all here, but how has that impacted, thus far, our kids who are now in this cycle of of the time they should be at grade point?
I would love to jump in on this one. A couple of things. So one, I phrase it, I'm sure all of you have been hearing a lot over the last year, is the digital divide, specifically in a state like ours. I think about places like Washington Parish that is still struggling to get actual access to broadband internet. You think about what Zoom school or trying to attempt Zoom school has looked like for those kids, or right here in Orleans Parish where I live, where we had a large number of kids who didn't have access to devices, or they had one device in the house that may or may not have access to internet, or they had one device in the house and multiple kids. I can't tell you how many stories I've heard from my friends who are still in the classroom of, a family's got 3 kids, all in different grade levels and 3 different Zoom meetings to join. Well, who gets to learn today? We sit here, I'm saying this as I sit here, and my fiance, who is still an early childhood teacher, she's been teaching virtually for most of this year, and given the realities of what can and cannot be done, she's trying to turn what should be a 90-person block of ELA for a class of kids into 15-minute segments that they get twice a week or 3 times a week. And so our kids are getting much less time, much less attention, much less individualized education. And so I think the data that we're going to see coming out of COVID around education acuity is going to be really, really stark. And it's going to be bifurcated along lines of race and socioeconomic, because the reality is for families of means, they have all gone out and gotten private tutors that are helping make sure that their kids are able to get the individualized help that they need. And for families that don't have means, it's whatever the school can cobble together with the little resources that they've had to make this enormous pivot.
Yeah, I think, Louisiana has, we ranked at the bottom in almost every category related to education, and that's so unfortunate. Have we been able to see what other states or other places are doing, what they've implemented that actually has worked, that we could also, in addition to this tremendous bill, that can help in, closing this gap?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you have a lot of states around the country, doing various things, not just with respect to literacy, but really focusing on the whole child. At the end of the day, Senator, you know better than anyone, and certainly Ms. French knows this from the state perspective, budgets reflect priorities. And as a state, we really have to get serious, in investing in education at the full level. Early ed, K through 12, adequately paying our teachers, making sure that classrooms have the right investment. I mean, there are so many pieces to this puzzle. But at the end of the day, the budget allocation is absolutely cool. Having the accountability that goes along with those budget allocations and making sure that those dollars are being spent. I do think there's a will. I have been talking to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and the conversations are very, very encouraging. The more that this data comes to the forefront, the more Democrats, Republicans, white, black, North and South Louisiana realizes that we really have to do a better job in Louisiana because it affects us on so many levels, as I said at the beginning: workforce, healthcare, criminal justice, etc.
Mr. Willis, I'm interested in your perspective on, on is much of this problem rooted in economic factors? I mean, we talk about civil rights and, the cycle of poor education leading to poor paying jobs, and that really it's a right of ours to be able to have higher, to have access, right? I work,
and it's exactly that, because it's just, as we talked about earlier, the families that have the means to do it, they're going to go out and get their private tutors. They're going to take care of their child. Whereas, you have so much, especially in a state like Louisiana, where our incarceration rate is so high. You have parents who come out who want to do good and do good by their children. They just don't have the means to do it. And so it really does become so cyclical. Whereas, and so much credit to Representative Hughes and this freshman legislator, all the new guys and gals we got. It's so exciting because for the first time, they're not just talking about it. They're doing it. I mean, there really is so much movement around the Capitol because, again, he hit the hammer on the nail. It's just that. It doesn't matter, black, white, whatever race, whatever socioeconomic status is, this benefits all children across the board. And it really does bring those lower ones up. So hopefully we don't have to look at the data in the sense of, oh my goodness, just 4 or 5 parishes are carrying the rest of the state, where we can get to those teachers and those children at an early age and provide them with the background and the support and everything they need. Because as everyone knows, all it takes is one. You get one hardworking child to change and turn their life around and go on and do big things. You can change the outcome of an entire family. So, I mean, it really is a disservice and the borderline criminal to not provide those children with the opportunity to do that.
So Representative Hughes, what kind of feedback are you getting from your colleagues or from just people around the community in general?
Yeah, I tell you, the feedback in the Capitol has been amazing. Both me and Representative McKnight, have been absolutely blown away just by the sheer level of interest amongst our colleagues. And as we talk about this throughout the community, community members are just really shocked at the number of our students that are not on grade level. And so they're excited that, we can potentially make a meaningful investment, because at the end of the day, what that means is if we can get our kids on grade level, they're going to become taxpayers one day. They're going to contribute greatly to our economy. So, folks are really excited about that. And I think this is going to be a great conversation in the Capitol, a great debate. And I think when we adjourn sine die on June 10th, this will be something that we can really celebrate on behalf of our children.
So before we open it up, I'm not sure if we have any questions from our viewing virtual audience. But I'd like to ask all of the other panelists out, except for Representative Hughes, because he'll be a little biased. What would you recommend, or what suggestions would you give legislators and other education board members in the state and at the local level? What would you recommend they do to continue to work towards fixing this childhood literacy problem? You can go.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I can jump in. Well, I'm going to put it simply: money. The answer is funding and investment, because the reality of it is that when you look at, as a state, Louisiana has consistently ranked in the bottom third of our investment in children, both in early childhood programming, in K-12 programming, and other types of programming for children. Well, you get what you pay for. We're ranking the bottom third in the country in funding. We rank in the bottom third in the country in outcomes. That's your answer. And so I would be a very bad early childhood advocate if I didn't bring up the LA B2 plan. The other thing I would say is that we have a roadmap. We did the work. We created a 10-year plan by which we could provide early childhood access for birth through 3 and get that really important age range I talked about, where 90% of brain development happens for 90% of children in this state who need access. And we can do that over 10 years with about $86 million a year of investment. If we did that, we would get there in a 10-year lifespan. And we'd be able to make real progress toward this. And so at the end of the day, as Representative Hughes said, a budget is a moral document. It lays out in dollars and cents what our priorities are. And we have shown exactly over time what the priorities in Louisiana have been. And it hasn't been children for quite some time.
Awesome.
I would like to jump in in addition to money, I think that goes with, we put our money where we prioritize. And I think that the priority has to be the future of our state, which is the future of the people in the state. And so that also requires a continuous commitment. We know that our legislature turns over frequently because of term limits, but we also know that our priorities as a state have not been to a consistent message. And I think that Kenny talked about the blueprint. We've had blueprints. We need we need the populace, we need the people of Louisiana to demand that their legislators commit. And we as the people of Louisiana need to commit to our plans. And I think that if we truly want to change the poverty rates, the economic growth of our state, to make us more attractive to business, we've got to invest on the front end and in the education of our young people.
And that is so, I mean, I'm going to let, continue, but that is so true. I mean, when you talk about, from a business perspective and an economic development perspective, I can tell you, when we're courting businesses, or the first thing they're going to want to see is what is the literacy rate? How many people are graduating from high school? I mean, so what is their workforce going to look like in order to achieve the company's goals? And so this is very, very critical. And then, just attracting high profile corporations. They're going to want to move to communities where educational system is top notch. So yeah, this is really important. Anybody else would like to share?
Can I add one more thing to that, just to respond to what Ms. French said? The one thing I'd like to add to the point about workforce development that Ms. French made is that a stat that always pops into my head in these conversations is that 78%, I'm saying that again, 78% of Louisiana residents were born here, which is the largest proportion of any state in the country. The next closest state is down near 50%. So what that means is that of the adults and the tax-paying adults in the state, chances are they grew up here. So when we talk about our children and we talk about preparing them for college and beyond, it is literally the future of our state. People are not moving here the way they move to other states. Our workforce, our populace is largely made up of Louisianans that are native. And so if we're not taking care of our children, we are literally not taking care of the future of the state.
Absolutely. Is there, Representative Hughes, is there a select committee on early childhood literacy?
There's a commission. There's not a select committee of the legislature, but there is a commission. On the House side, Representative Hilferty has been leading a lot of our work around early childhood education, and Senator Beth Mizell on the Senate side. But we do have bipartisan working groups on both sides that have been recently formed. And so I'm excited to be a part of the House bipartisan working group.
Very good. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
And there was, it actually sunsetted this year, the Early Literacy Commission, and that was one of the driving forces that brought forth a lot of the ideas for this. They were the ones who were instrumental with Representative Royce Duplessis's bill last year for the Early Literacy Pilot Program that got funded. And we've already started having some conversations with some of our elected officials. We're going to introduce that resolution to get it brought back as well.
I think because in order to keep it a focus on it, because I know as a I remember as a legislator, even though we had our passion and what we wanted to make happen, we were still, thousands and thousands of other interests that we also had to give some attention to. So to have a committee or a group or a commission whose sole focus is that at least be the nucleus for groups to be able to go to and information can be shared.
And Senator, one thing that I'd just like to add to that point, even though the commission is sunset, and I'm confident that it's going to reemerge, one thing, as you know, we don't like to just see these commissions make recommendations and they sit on the shelf. So I'm very proud to have partnered with AFC and others that will actually bring forth a resolution that will actually direct Bessie to go ahead and implement the recommendations of the Early Literacy Commission. So we want to see these things come into implementation.
Effective leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Hughes.
We do have a question from the virtual audience. The question is, what exactly will the money be used for? And will the stipend go to the family for private tutoring or to the school for extra help?
Yeah, so the way this is going to be set up, every child that qualifies, and within the legislation, it talks about how a child qualifies. In K through 3, you have to be identified as not being on grade level. In grades 4 and 5, if you score below mastery in the language arts portion of the assessment, or if your English or language arts teacher recommends you to be a part of this program, then you will qualify. The money would not go directly to families. The money would go directly to providers. But let me be clear. These providers, either individuals or entities, must be qualified. The Department of Education and Bessie will promulgate rules. They will screen potential providers. And so, for example, let's say my mother loves children, but she has no background in reading, or, we can't just say because she loves children and loves to read books to children that she would qualify to be a provider. This is serious business. Also with the funds, there will be an annual audit. And these entities will be evaluated. So, but the money will not go directly to families. It will go directly to providers after services have been.
So are there any other questions? Speak now. If not, so I'd like to just allow each one of you to give some parting words. This has been just a tremendous event, because it just highlights the issue very nicely for us. And so I'd like to see if Ms. French, if you'd like to go first and give some parting words of wisdom.
First of all, I'd like to acknowledge and thank Representative Hughes and the Federation for hosting this podcast, Representative Hughes for taking the leadership on the legislation. I also would like to challenge Representative Hughes, because we want to make you a champion for our early childhood literacy continuum and our adult literacy continuum. Please know that early childhood development, as well as providing the right interventions for our children who did not get the early childhood linguistic development, is about the future of our state. And so I think I want to continuously say, this is not just about providing remediation. This is about the continuation of the ability of Louisiana to provide great futures for all Louisianians. And to that issue, I say thank you again.
Okay, Mr. Francis.
Thank you guys for having me. It's always great to have the honor of being invited to the same panel as someone as amazing as Ms. Thelma French. Thank you, Representative Hughes, for your leadership on this issue, on this bill. It will definitely help folks. And I would echo Ms. French's sentiments that as much as we can continue to increase our investment in early childhood education and our youngest learners, not just in words, but as in dollars and cents in the ways that we prioritize our resources, then we're going to start to see change in Louisiana. We've been at or near the bottom of the list for a very long time. And for a long time in Louisiana, we have this saying we keep talking about, well, thank God for Mississippi. A thing to know is that Mississippi has now passed us. So we can no longer say this, and we're starting to lose the excuses to start to make some changes around this. And so it's past time that we started moving forward.
Awesome. Okay, Mr. Willis.
And to echo that, Mississippi hasn't just passed us. To use them in the same sentence as us is doing a disservice to the success they've had. I mean, I have to tip my cap to them of how well they've been in implementing all of their programs and the like. And it's just that. I mean, we are seeing like never before. We're finally starting to prioritize this. And most importantly, we're finally starting to have the honest conversations about it. I can't tell you how many legislators I've talked to and say those same exact stats and numbers and everything we've been talking about, and basically have to pick their jaw up off the floor when they realize not only are we behind, it's how far behind we are. So there really is some great opportunity with this, with all the federal funding and state funding becoming available. And again, the critical point is people are finally having these honest conversations about it and providing us with support to have roadmaps and fix it. And again, Representative Hughes, I can't thank you enough for taking this on and doing this, and greatly look forward to working with you for this session and many to come to turn this state around. And once again, be comparing ourselves to Mississippi, but them asking us what we're doing instead of the other way around.
And Representative Hughes.
Well, thank you, Senator, again for moderating. Let me thank AFC once again. Kenny and Mike, great to see you. And to Ms. Delma French, who's been doing this work for such a long time and have inspired me. Thank you so much for extraordinary leadership and ongoing leadership. I want to make it clear, to our listening audience, this literacy bill is only one piece of the puzzle. And I want to reassure our early childhood advocates, we will not do this literacy bill at the expense of early childhood education. It can't be either or. We have to do both. So we have to get our kids back on grade level, currently not on grade level. But early childhood, as has been stated so many times, is so important to hopefully ensure that we don't have to, in second, third, fourth, fifth grade, get kids back on grade level because they have that early foundation. As a candidate, I campaigned on a platform of eradicating poverty. So when you look at the types of bills that I introduce, it really feeds into, eradicating poverty. We can't control a zip code that our children are born into, but what we can do is give every child a fighting chance to succeed and be successful. And that's the goal here. So with that, thank you so much for the opportunity to participate today.
And I think you have summed it up very nicely. And I'd like to, again, thank you all for taking time out. Thank you for your passion and for your work in this very important arena. I look forward to seeing really good things happening. I see, I do see good things happening for our children. And with leadership such as Representative Hughes, I'm very, very optimistic. So with that, I want to thank our virtual audience, and hopefully you can join us in this fight. Have a good night.